Hey everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today for Robots of Puget Sound, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's ROV program. This program is part of our Wild Washington education program. Wild Washington offers lessons, events, and other fish, wildlife, and natural resource themed educational resources. If you're interested in learning more about our Wild Washington program, please see the link that I just put in the chat. My name is Leah Althauser, and I am the department's environmental education coordinator. And so this program is one of our Wild Washington Live offerings. We have other offerings that you could learn about beavers, you could learn about all sorts of different kinds of critters, and that's on our YouTube playlist that I just put in the chat. A couple of housekeeping things before we begin. We have enabled closed captioning, but if you'd like to turn it off, please click the button in the lower right corner but it says more, and then you'll see the option for turning off subtitles. We won't be taking verbal questions today, so raised hands will not be called on. But if you do have a question, we'd love to hear it and to answer it. So please put your question in the Q&A and our panelists will answer that. Today's event will be recorded for those who are unable to attend. And so let's begin. I'm so excited to introduce our presenters today. Today, we are meeting Ian and Katie, who are both scientific technicians with our marine fish program. And today we get to go sort of under the sea with them and learn how they study fish in the Puget Sound. Ian and Katie, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So I will pull up our presentation. Okay, is that coming up for everyone?
Yep, we can see that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hello everyone. I guess like Leah said, my name is Ian Craig.
And I'm Katie Kennedy.
And we are scientific technicians with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's Puget Sound Marine Fish Science Unit. And we're here today to talk to you about the robots of Puget Sound. This is WDFW's ROV program. So before we get started, just a few things about how we came to be within this unit. As I say, I'm a scientific technician. I work on the deck of our research vessel while we're out surveying, and I review the video that we bring back. I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Massachusetts in environmental science, and I've worked in a variety of other environments before coming to this unit, including salt marshes and desert streams. We were asked what our favorite fish were, and I think for me, it's a tie between the Olympic mud minnow, which is Washington's only endemic freshwater fish species, endemic meaning that they're only found in Washington state, and the copper rockfish. And you can see images of both of those down below.
All right, and I'm Katie Kennedy. I do all of the same tasks that Ian does. I got my undergrad from both University of South Florida and the University of Washington. I have previous experience in forage fish, salmonids, sediment transport in oceans and rivers, and the landforms they create, as well as habitat restoration. My favorite fish is the Pacific spiny lumpsucker. They are super adorable little orbs that look like they're in a constant state of confusion or surprise. And for rockfish, it's kind of a tie between tiger rockfish because they're just really aesthetically pleasing to look at shape-wise and color. And they aren't all that common in the videos that we see, so it's always a nice surprise for me when I do see them. And then the other rockfish that I really love is brown rockfish because they always make me think of caramel brownies when I see them, and that is my favorite dessert. As you may have noticed, our backgrounds are a little bit all over the place. And that we bring that up to show you that you don't necessarily have to be going to school with a hyper-focused topic in mind, like groundfish, to get into this field. That really pursuing any of the STEM fields, science, tech, engineering, mathematics, can get you here, and they all have a part to play in a successful survey. Okay. And like we briefly mentioned before, our unit studies and helps manages fish that live on or near the bottom, other known as groundfish. With research, we try to answer questions like, can we fish for this species while still preserving its population for future generations? If so, how many fish can people take in a certain period of time and for how long? If the answer is no, we shouldn't really be fishing for this species, then what do we need to do to restore the population to a healthy status and so that maybe we could fish for them again in the future? To answer those questions, we gather data utilizing regular hook and line fishing surveys. We do scuba diving surveys, trawl surveys, and what we'll be covering today, remote control robot surveys. There are other groups in the agency that delve into marine fish like forage fish species. And there is also a similar group on the coast that also collects groundfish data, but we're the only one with the robot.
Okay, so let's start off with, where do we work? Now, many of you will be familiar with Puget Sound already, and you might even be able to see it from your house. But for those of you who might be watching from east of the mountains, from the coast, or maybe even out of state, let's remind ourselves a bit about this body of water. Puget Sound is connected to the Pacific Ocean, which means that it's a marine environment, it's salt water. And as you can see on the map, it's connected to other bodies of water that are shared with Canada. And this larger system is called the Salish Sea. And again, as you can see on the map, we currently work in the main stem of Puget Sound, Hood Canal, and the San Juan Islands. In previous years, our group has also worked in Canadian waters and in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. However, we recently purchased a new research vessel, the Salish rover, which you'll see more of later on. And with this new vessel, our surveys can go for longer and farther afield than in the past. So we're hoping to return to the Strait of Juan de Fuca and eventually venture out onto the Washington coast.
All right, so we've got some poll questions here for community engagement. Just going to ask, how deep does everyone think Puget Sound is? You can answer in the poll function now, hopefully. All right. So hopefully those of you who are familiar with the sound answered E, 930 feet. The deepest part of Puget Sound is at Point Jefferson, which is just north of Bainbridge Island. And that's, like I said, 930 feet deep. And those who are familiar with the Seattle city skyline, that is almost as deep as Seattle's tallest building, the Columbia Center Tower. Even though we have some pretty deep parts in the sound, the average depth is only about, well, I say only, but 450 feet deep, and that's about the height of the Space Needle. These deep areas can make surveying fish in their natural habitat kind of difficult. Our options are scuba diving surveys, submarine surveys, and submersible robots. Scuba divers can only really safely explore about 130 feet. Anything beyond that requires highly specialized gear and training, and it can be really dangerous for the individual. So what do we do when we want to study anything deeper than that? We're left with submarines and remote control submarines. Maybe one day our unit will be able to afford a submarine, but until then, we use a robot, an ROV, which is a remotely operated vehicle. Okay. A concept that you might have heard of or might be familiar with is that the deeper you dive, the more pressure you experience. For about every 33 feet down you go, the pressure increases about 15 pounds per square inch. And at average Puget Sound depth, the ROV experiences about 210 pounds of pressure per square inch. And to illustrate that, that's about the weight of a common washing machine per square inch. At the deepest depths of Puget Sound, that pressure is almost double that. That is a lot of pressure on our little ROV. not to mention the species that live down there. But thankfully, our ROV is built to handle Puget Sound waters, though it can't go much further beyond those depths. As you can see in the slide there, the image with the styrofoam cups helps illustrate the compression depth relationship a little bit better. You might be familiar with other ROVs like Woods Hole's Oceanographic Institute's ROV, Argo, who was the first to explore the Titanic, or some ROVs that are more currently trending like Hercules and Argus of the Ocean Exploration Trust. If you have not heard of any of those, I highly recommend you check them out. All of those can dive much, much deeper than our little bot, but they're also much larger comparatively, which in turn requires much larger, more expensive vehicles to transport and a lot more fancy doodads to maintain.
Yeah, so how do we study the things that live in the depths of Puget Sound? Well, we can't quite go knocking on their door and asking them questions. But like Katie was saying, we try to do something similar. We use a variety of surveys to either bring them to us and work with them in hand, or to go to them using scuba surveys and this robot that we've been mentioning, which, as you'll see as we go through this presentation, is a great source for photos. All of the underwater photos that we're going to be showing that were taken with our ROV. Okay, so here's our robot. It's an ROV, which, like Katie said, is a remotely operated vehicle. We control it from the surface using a joystick to control 4 horizontal thrusters and 1 vertical thruster. And you can think of a propeller when you think of a thruster. A long cable comes out of the boat and goes down to the ROV, called an umbilical. And that brings power down to the ROV and sends video and data back up to the surface. The vehicle has 1 main video camera, which is what we use to see while we're driving, and also what we record so that we can go back through the data later. There are also a set of LED lights that are attached to the vehicle, and that allows us to see in those deep, dark depths that we work in. There is also a stereo camera, which is actually 2 cameras set up as a pair at a fixed distance from one another, and they take still images. And the stereo camera and the video camera are combined with the 2 lasers, which you can sometimes see in the underwater photos that we're going to be showing, and that allows us to measure things underwater. We also have a sonar system installed on the vehicle, which allows us to see what's coming up before we can actually see it on the video. And this helps us to avoid dangerous obstacles and to steer towards potential fish habitat. We also will sometimes mount a GoPro in addition to our standard cameras, and that allows us to record in HD video. So how does it work? The ROV is deployed from the back deck of our research vessel, the Salish Rover, which you can see there on the right. And the Salish Rover is a 57-foot former Canadian Coast Guard vessel that we have retrofitted to work as an ROV survey platform. The new vessel has a number of big advantages for us, including being able to live aboard and being a much more stable platform to work on than our previous vessel. So when we're ready to deploy the ROV, we use our deck crane, which you can see there on the left, to lower the ROV into the water. Once all the systems are confirmed as working and the vessel is in position, the ROV drops down to the bottom and we can start to look for fish. Piloting the ROV isn't quite as simple as driving a car down a straight road, though. It's really more like flying a kite. The ROV is relatively light and can be easily blown around on the bottom by the current. And to make things even more difficult, our boat captain has to maneuver our vessel to keep up with the ROV. Otherwise, the boat will actually pull the ROV off of the bottom. And this can get quite tricky when the current at the surface is doing something different to the current on the bottom. And it takes a lot of boat handling skills to be able to keep the two close together and moving smoothly. To help keep the ROV going where we want it to go, we use what we call a clump weight. It's a heavy weight that we dangle on the end of a long line and attach to the ROV's cable at various points. This weight helps to keep the ROV on the bottom while still allowing the vehicle to move around freely. So now that we have the ROV on the bottom and moving where we want it to go, we run for about 30 minutes along the contour of the sea floor in areas where our model predicts that there should be our target species. And that's usually areas with a steep slope and or rock. And when we're done with the site, we bring the ROV and the clump weight back on board and we take the videos back to the office.
In the office, Ian and I spend many long hours reviewing transect footage to identify species present, as well as classifying the habitat. Then recording that information into a database that we have set up. When we finish looking through all the videos, our data is then analyzed, and we try to paint a bigger picture on how many fish are in Puget Sound based on how many of each kinds of species we see and the different types of habitat. To illustrate how challenging this can be sometimes, I've clipped an image from a transect to see if you all could spot the fish in this image. If you were able to spot the fish in this image, it is a superbly camouflaged flatfish, then you might want to consider applying for a spot on our team. One 30-minute transect can take nearly a full day to review, and many get reviewed up to 4 times by multiple people to ensure proper identification and that all of the species are accounted for. As state employees, we're trying to be good stewards of state funds while also trying to balance the time spent reviewing data while maximizing the data we collect. Now, some of you might be asking, why don't we rely on more modern applications like machine learning and just feed video data through a program that recognizes all of the important information and spits out a summary? Well, we're not quite at a spot yet that we could take advantage of that. As evident by this picture, some of these species require a highly trained eye to detect something and that's really hard to train a computer to do accurately and consistently. That's not to say that there aren't programs out there that can do some form of that, and we're certainly exploring those options, but I don't think we're quite at a level of advancement yet where we could fully adopt that.
Okay, so what do we use this thing to look at? I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to have you tell me. So can you name a type of fish that lives in Puget Sound? And you can send us your answers in the Q&A function, and we can have a look.
So we have flounder, dogfish, salmon, lingcod, wolf eel, black rockfish, rock sole.
Okay. You keep sending in your answers, but
we have a few more coming in. Sorry, we have robinfish, rockfish, lumpsucker, and sculpin, herring as well.
okay. Yeah, you're all on track there. Imagining a lot of you maybe were thinking of salmon. Maybe you have heard of steelhead, which are a type of trout. Both of these are salmonids, and they're managed by other groups within our agency, but they are kind of well-known species, and they do live in Puget Sound. Now, some people have mentioned flounder and other flatfish species. Those we see quite often in our videos, and we do manage those as a unit. We won't talk too much about them today, but you're right. Some of the people were saying herring or other forage fish, and that might be because you've seen previous Wild Washington presentations that talk about our southern resident killer whales and the importance of these small fish to salmon and ultimately to orcas. And we do see them occasionally in our videos, but we don't work with them too much, and a separate group manages them. But did you know that we have sharks in Puget Sound? A lot of people don't. We actually have several species of shark that live here, including 6- and 7-gill sharks and spiny dogfish, which someone mentioned. And although this 6-gill shark looks pretty scary, you don't need to be worried about them if you're going swimming at the beach. These sharks live along the bottom of Puget Sound, and they prefer deep water. And they're generally not considered to be a threat to humans unless they're provoked.
I heard a lot of people say rockfish. Go rockfish. There are about 28 species of rockfish in Washington state waters, and about half of those are pretty common in Puget Sound, and 2 of which, yelloweye and picasso rockfish, are listed on the Endangered Species Act as locally threatened or higher risk of extinction. They come in a range of sizes, shapes, and some absolutely beautiful colors and patterns. They exhibit a wide variety of life histories and occupy a whole range of habitats, ranging from shallow water reefs, kelp forests, deep sea cliffs. Some rockfish can even be found in less complex habitat, like soft muddy sand. But as a general rule, like their name implies, rockfish like rocks. Another cool feature rockfish have is a self-defense mechanism. They have venomous spines on their first dorsal fins, the anal fin, and pelvic fins. A sting from one of these spines can be mild to considerably painful. So if you're jabbed by one of these while out fishing with your family or friends, the best way to neutralize it is with very hot and ideally clean water. Something else that's unique about rockfish is that they have specialized gas-filled organs called swim bladders that they use to maintain buoyancy while they're swimming. What's even more unique about their swim bladders is that they have what is called a closed system and inflate and deflate with gases with their bloodstream. Unfortunately, they don't have the ability to burp or fart away air like some species of fish can, specifically herring. These closed systems make quickly changing the pressure that they're acclimated at by, say, accidentally catching one and reeling it up to surface pressure is particularly dangerous for them, which Ian will talk a little bit more about in later slides. When we as scientists think about how to conduct research and make management recommendations, it's important to understand and consider that unique ecology for each of those species. And studying them in their natural habitat helps answer a lot of those questions, as well as poses some new ones, like why do we see species in this particular habitat? Or why do these species like hanging out with these other species? All things that with time we hope to answer. All right, we're going to do another poll question to see if everyone's still awake. How old do you think rockfish can get? All right, looks like some of you are awake. Amazingly, there are many species of rockfish that can live well over 100 years. Yelloweye rockfish, one of Puget Sound's threatened rockfish, can live over 120 years. It's one of the older lived rockfish species and one of the oldest lived rockfish species in Puget Sound. Rockfish are particularly special because they get better with age. And when I say they get better, I'm not talking about flavor. More that the bigger and older they are, the more healthy babies that they can produce. And the more healthy babies they produce, the chances of them surviving to reproductive age greatly increases. A side note about this image, you may have noticed there's a little string looking thing on this fish's back that is not a parasite. It is an ID tag or spaghetti tag. This is super cool for a couple of reasons. One, using the ROV, we got data on this tag fish without having to bring it all the way back up to the surface again. And two, we know that the tagging method worked, the fish survived the descent back down, and that the fish is doing fine with her new jewelry. Fine enough to be pregnant, which is a really big win all around. Okay. While it is generally safe to assume that a big rockfish is an old rockfish, size can be impacted by many variables, stuff like environmental conditions, diet, etc. One way to get definitive age is with fish ear bones, other known as otoliths. They are very much like tree rings. During periods of slow growth, dense thin bands form, and then during growth spurts, wider, more transparent bands formed. You could see the similarities between the two in the images there. Unfortunately, obtaining a pair of otoliths is very invasive in that we have to cut their heads open in order to get them. And that obviously severely impacts their ability to survive. So it's nice to have the option to view them without doing any damage to them with our ROV.
So why do we study rockfish? Well, we study rockfish for many reasons, and not just because they're cool fish. We could spend all day on the status of rockfish in Puget Sound, how we got there, and where do we go from here. But since we don't have that kind of time, the Cliff Notes version is that rockfish were overfished. 2 species were listed under the Endangered Species Act. We closed the fishery in 2010, meaning that we no longer allow people to fish for rockfish in Puget Sound. And now we work to recover their populations. And if you'd like to learn more about this, you can visit our website and we'll put a link to that in the chat for you.
So what other species do we see? All right, here's a few examples. We see wolf eels, which is a bit of a misnomer as they are neither wolves nor eels. We see skates, which even though they don't often look like it, they're really close relatives of sharks. We see ratfish, rockfish, obviously. We see lingcod, which you may have caught or seen if you've been out fishing with friends or family. A note about this lingcod pictured, they're not normally blue, and finding a blue one is considered rare. This is due to a mutation that creates excess biopigment called biliverdin. People also have the same pigment. You might have seen it whenever you get a bruise. It's the same thing that makes your bruises look greenish blue when they heal.
So some other of the cool things that we see on the upper left here is a sea sponge. This is a glass sponge, and it can live for just an incredibly long period of time. On the upper right is a red Barotrauma, which is fairly uncommon for us to see because they're excellent at hiding in little crevices, even better than rockfish. We also see octopus, but I'm going to come back to that in just a second. And we see anemone, and these are metridium, and they offer a really great place for young or small rockfish to hide out. But we also have giant Pacific octopus in Puget Sound. Now, most of the time, we see them as an arm coming out from underneath a rock or maybe out of a crevice. But sometimes we get to see them out in the open, and they're really impressive. Okay. In addition to the fish species that our unit is tasked with managing, we also see a variety of commercially and recreationally important species, which are managed by other parts of our agency. And we don't work with these species ourselves, but we're able to pass this information off to the groups that do, which can help to inform their decisions. And this brings me on to a really important aspect of the ROV program, because we save all of the video that we record. So other researchers, both now and in the future, have the opportunity to go back through our videos and reanalyze them to pursue different questions. And this doesn't end with just fish and invertebrates either. We collect data on biocover, things like the presence of kelp, soft corals, and anemone, and the substrate they live on. So mud, sand, boulders, the slope, and other features of the ocean floor. We are by no means experts in these areas, but again, that's the great part about saving all of this video. It can be sent off to the people who are experts when they have questions that they want to answer.
All right, some less cool things we see. And yes, that is a Spider-Man kite for those who are wondering. We often see this kind of debris on the bottom when we're conducting surveys, items ranging from run-of-the-mill garbage to home appliances to derelict fishing gear. Derelict fishing gear is gear that's been degrading in place because for one reason or another, it was unable to be reclaimed by its owner. Organizations like Northwest Straits Foundation work to remove reachable derelict fishing gear, but first they need to know where it is. We share that location data with them regularly so that lines and pots that are reachable can be removed. I should emphasize that they only do this for derelict fishing gear, not other trash. So friendly public service announcement, please don't use the sound as a garbage can, otherwise we will see it.
So, like Katie was saying earlier, one of the other things that we see that's not so great, the depths that rockfish live in mean that they're under a lot of pressure from all of that water that's above them. And they've adapted to survive this pressure, but what it means is that if they're brought up to the surface quickly, where the pressure is less, they aren't used to it. And the gases in their bodies can expand, and that can kill, that can balloon their organs, which can kill the fish. And if they're not brought down, back down quickly. And this is called barotrauma. This is why we don't want to accidentally catch rockfish in Puget Sound, and why we ask that everyone who's fishing in about 60 feet of water or more on Puget Sound carries a descending device with them. And we'll talk more about what those are in just a moment. You might also hear people talk about puncturing or deflating the fish's organs to allow them to descend, but please don't do this. This was once recommended, but it has a good chance of killing the fish. So if you hear about someone talking about this, or you hear them, please remind them that there is new advice out there. Some of the key symptoms to look for in barotrauma are bulging eyes and swollen organs, which can protrude from the mouth, meaning that they can come out of the mouth. And you can sometimes see small bubbles that form in their eyes, which you might be able to see in this bottom left image if you look closely. We'll also send a link in the chat to a video which explains barotrauma in a little more depth if you'd like to learn more about this. So one of the ways that you and your family can help rockfish recovery is by encouraging the people that you might go fishing with, or that you know who go fishing, to keep a descending device with them if they're fishing in deep marine waters. Descending devices come in various configurations, but they all have the same goal, and that's bringing a fish back down to the depth that it was caught at. We want to do this instead of releasing the fish at the surface, because the gases, once the gases in the fish have expanded, they often can't swim back down on their own. And once we bring them back down to the depth that they are used to, the gases compress again and the fish can swim around normally. And these really do work. Do you remember that yelloweye that Katie was talking about earlier, the one that was tagged and released? Well, in order to tag that fish, it was brought up to the surface and suffered the effects of barotrauma. But we descended it using one of these devices, and as you can see, it's happy, healthy, and about to have babies. So you can use a variety of commercially bought devices, like the lower two here, some of which can automatically release the fish at desired depth, or you can make your own one at home, like this one in the upper left, made from a milk crate. And we'll send some links in the chat, which will show you how to use each of the types of devices and how you can make your own one at home if you want to.
All right, some other ways you can help include volunteering, or seeing if a career working in natural resources would be right for you. There are many, many different positions available with a variety of state, federal, private organizations that do really interesting work in this field. This can be really varied. You could do work as a video reviewer, a deckhand, boat captain, mechanic, scientist, programmer, fisherman, and that's all just tasks that our small unit of 7 people do. And we always like to see more people helping to preserve and protect our natural resources. But probably the biggest way you can help is being open to learning more. Keep your eye out for natural resource issues and be willing to learn more about them. The more you know, the better place you will be to help.
Thank you everyone for joining and listening to our talk. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll take any questions that you might have now, and if you have others later on, or if there's one that we can't answer, you can email Bob Bakunski, who is our ROV program manager and our groundfish research scientist, and we'll, he'll be able to answer any of the questions that we haven't been able to get to. And we'll also play some video while we are answering questions, and that way you can see a little bit more of what we do on our surveys.
Wow, I just learned so much. Thank you so much, Ian and Katie. We do have a few questions while you get your video started. Our first question is, how long is the umbilical?
That's a good question. Ordinarily, it is 300 meters. In the process of running this vehicle for a number of years, things have happened to it, so it's been cut back a bit. But ideally, it's about 300 meters. So we can technically reach the bottom of the deepest part of Puget Sound, but that would mean that we have to be going straight down. It would be pretty hard to work down there.
Thank you. Our next question is, how far apart are the laser dots on the robot?
That's another good question. They're set at 10 centimeters apart.
Okay. It looks, I think it, like for me, it looks a little further in the video. I don't know. Like I was thinking feet in my head.
Yeah, it's kind of gives you a little bit sense of scale right there. And
our next question is, why are yellow-eyed rockfish threatened?
that's going to be because of previous overfishing. It kind of, the problems with rockfish kind of started in the sort of 60s to 70s when we sort of switched to targeting a little bit more rockfish in Puget Sound. And the main issue that came out of that was that we didn't really fully understand their life history, meaning we didn't understand that how old they lived and how long it takes for them to reach maturity. And so the point at which they can start to have offspring of their own. For yelloweye, for instance, like Katie said, they can live to about 120 years. But what it also means is that they don't start having offspring until they're about 20 years old. So you can kind of think of them in terms of a human time scale, maybe even a little longer. And so not understanding that meant that we were going for different kinds of, we were targeting them a little bit too heavily. So right now we're trying to rebuild that population by removing the fishing pressure from them.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Thank you. Our next question is, have there been mortality studies done on rockfish brought to the surface and then descended back down?
There have. And that's why we like to use these descending devices, is it's shown that they really are effective. We might be able to find you a link to one. If you wanted to email us, we can send you some more information about that. But absolutely.
Great, thank you. How often do you go out to take videos?
I don't know, Katie, you want to answer that one?
Sure. We try to survey almost all year round. We have kind of like a break period during November, December, and January, just because the water is generally really choppy and it's hard to put a heavy ROV and a clump weight in the water when the boat is shaking all over the place. But from day to day on a regular surveying day, we get about, anywhere between 4 video transects to 9. So collecting lots of information throughout the year. And then when we're not on the boat, we're processing that data.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question comes from Facebook, and we have a viewer who would like to know if the department allows volunteers on board the ROV platform to help as deckhands or assistants.
Yeah, this is something we have done in the past. We've been kind of hamstrung by COVID regulations and procedures for the last couple of years, but it is something we're hoping to do again in the future. So if you're interested in what we do and experiencing it, please email that email that we put up for Bob Pakunski, and we can try and get you out on a boat when we're able to safely.
Ian, do you think you could pop that email in the chat for folks?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our next question then is, how long can you safely keep a rockfish at the surface for?
Okay, you want to answer that one while I grab this email?
That really depends on a lot of factors. The general rule is you want to try and get it down as quickly as possible, just because it's similar if you were trying to hold your breath in water. You want to try to give them the best opportunity they can by getting them down as quickly as you can. Like I said, the factors are involved, whether or not it's an older fish or a younger fish. But yeah, generally try to get it down as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you. Can we farm rockfish?
I know, I'm guessing they're referring to aquaculture, and I've not seen anything about attempts to farm rockfish. I imagine it would be fairly difficult. I don't know, Katie, have you seen anything about that?
At least in Washington, there aren't really any attempts to do that. I know overseas in China, they farm rockfish, but they usually use younger lived species like black rockfish. But farming rockfish around here might be a little bit of a shaky topic, and we would have to do a lot more investigation on that to see if it's something that ecosystems can handle. The financial aspects of that, there's definitely a lot more research that would need to be done if we wanted to farm them here.
Great, thank you so much. And we just have a couple more questions for you. So folks, if you have any more questions for Katie or Ian, please pop them in the Q&A now. When you go to a restaurant and you order rockfish tacos, do you know if the fish are typically caught in the US?
That varies from restaurant to restaurant. I like to ask just because I like knowing whether or not fish were sustainably caught. I know some of the local restaurants have rockfish from Washington and Oregon coast. But you know, it really depends on how proactive the restaurants are in getting local fish, or whether or not they're aiming for sustainable practices. It's always a good measure to ask, and they will generally tell you.
Thank you. How do the fish interact with the ROV? Are they frightened of it, and do the lights affect them at all?
That's a great question. That's been the subject of a number of studies, both by our group and others. And they all kind of respond to them differently. It kind of depends on the species. Some of them are terrified of it and will run away and avoid. Flatfish species will bury themselves in the sand. Others will actually chase the lasers. I think at the beginning of this video, you saw a group of spiny dogfish that were kind of zooming all over through the video. And they're one of the ones that will kind of, they seem to use the ROV as a means of hunting. And they will kind of follow the ROV around and look for fish that way. So it's really interesting to see.
Great. A couple more questions come in, and these will be the last, just doing a quick time check. What powers the rover thrusters?
So it's that umbilical cable that we talked about before. It's in some of those photos you might have seen as a yellow cable going down. And it's just an electrical cable that runs down to the ROV and is also in that, housed within that cable housing. It also has data cables that brings the input from our control pieces down to the ROV, and then it brings all that data back up. So it's powered off of our vessel. It's all hardwired into there.
What is the most unusual fish that you have seen on video?
I'll let you go first, Katie.
Unusual. I mean, we don't see six gills very often. So whenever we do, you can hear everybody like squealing in the wheelhouse over it. So that's always a joy. Let's see.
My first answer was definitely the six gill.
Yeah, we all get really excitable about that.
Yeah.
Okay, and our last question of the day will be, do you always go to the same spots in Puget Sound to do the surveys?
It's another great question. We don't. We have a model, it's run through the computer that kind of randomly assigns us stations throughout Puget Sound based on where we expect to see rockfish. And if you want more information about how all of that works, I would encourage you to talk to Bob Bukunski. He's the one who created it all. But we have been talking about maybe going back to certain sites multiple times where we just know that there's a lot of the fish that we're interested in. and say we found a yelloweye, we will go back to go and visit them because they kind of find a spot they like and they stay there. So you can go back and see the same fish again and again and again. So we do like to go and check in on them sometimes, but when we're doing our survey, we're trying to randomly assess the number of or where fish are.
And that's for the ROV. Other surveys that we do, trawl survey and dive surveys, those are generally going back to the same spots over and over again to get, you know, a collection of data.
You two are really fascinating people because I keep getting questions come in. With just a couple more, I promise. Where do you see glass sponges?
Yeah, they're not terribly common in Puget Sound, but we do see them. We've seen them a lot more in Canada. I'm not quite sure where this one was that we took the picture from.
Yeah, they're generally up north. That's where the majority of them, yeah. Deep water, obviously, and lots of really rugged terrain. And they like to, you know, sit on those outcroppings so that they can get good nutrients flowing through. So like Admiralty Inlet area, that would have a lot of good sponges. Trying to think of some other locations that might have them. I think if I remember correctly, the Narrows has a little bit of sponge habitat, but I might be remembering that incorrectly.
There's a lot to remember when you guys
Yes.
go through those videos. It's impressive you remember that much.
Oh, you should see our supervisor. Oh my gosh, she is incredible with her memory of the footage. She could see like one little outcropping. She's like, oh, that's there and there. And we did that like 4 years ago. It's pretty impressive.
Wow. Okay, our final question is, do you ever see any long nose lancets?
We have not seen any in the video to my knowledge, but we have seen them on trawl, if I'm not mistaken, Ian.
Yeah, they might have caught one at one point. I know that usually goes in our file of strange fish that people find washed up on the beach.
Yeah.
They're pretty rare to find.
Yeah, hopefully with our new vessel and traveling more in the strait and out on the coast, we might be able to see them more frequently, but they, from what I know, they don't come all that often into the Sound, just due to diet and temperature changes and whatnot.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up all of our questions. Ian and Katie, this has been fabulous. I learned a ton, and I hope that folks watching and tuned in learned a lot as well. I just want to thank you so much for your time in putting together this presentation. And I hope that you both have a great day, and everyone watching, I hope that you have a great day as well. If you registered for our Zoom, you will be receiving a survey link. We would love it if you would take that survey and give us feedback. Love to know what we could improve, what you think we did well, what you'd like to see in the future. And with that, thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.